Good day, everyone. Welcome to today's SecurityBoulevard.com webinar. We've got a really fascinating topic, very timely. Our topic is 6 AppSec lessons from the SolarWinds and FireEye breach. Today's webinar is sponsored by Cycode. My name is Mitch Ashley, and I will be your host and moderator. Just a little bit of housekeeping here. We are recording the webinar, and all participants will receive an email with a link to the recording. We're also giving away some $25 gift cards at the end. So please stick around, find out if you're one of our lucky winners. I know also we have 2 speakers today. They love questions and would be happy to entertain your questions. So please enter those into the GoToWebinar questions tab. So let's move on to our topic, 6 and FireEye breach. I'm going to turn things right over to Andrew and Ronan. So take it away, guys.
So hey everyone, I'm Ronan. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Cycode. Before Cycode, I was the head of research at Reason Cybersecurity, and prior to that, I was the CTO at a company called the FireEye, startup company. And before that, I was a team lead at the Hate 200 unit of the Israeli Defense Forces.
And my name's Andrew Fife. I run marketing for Cycode. Prior to that, I ran marketing for a company called Shift Left. And prior to that, worked on the marketing team at Okta. I was actually the first marketing person there. And before that, ran product marketing for a company called Untangle. So I've really spent most of my career in marketing cybersecurity software startups. So we'll jump into it now. What we wanted to talk about today are AppSec lessons from SolarWinds and the subsequent breaches at numerous other companies. But first, we wanted to start with a little bit of background on kind of who is SolarWinds, the timeline of what happened, and then we'll jump into to how the hack actually itself worked and what the lessons that we all can and should learn from it. So first and foremost, SolarWinds is an organization that manages infrastructure, the network, and various other types of assets for their clients. In fact, in an October earnings call, so just a couple months ago, their CEO, Kevin Thompson, said there was not a database or an IT deployment model out there to which the company did not provide some level of monitoring or management. He said, "We don't think anyone else in the market is really even close in terms of the breadth of the coverage we have. We manage everyone's network gear." Next slide, please. So why compromise SolarWinds? And the answer is because, frankly, of what they do. Because they manage so many different types of assets for their customers, they wind up with really, really deep integrations into their customers' environments. And those integrations wind up giving them lots of access to be able to monitor and respond, but also to be able to monitor and respond, they need credentials and they need permissions. So it's really, really deep access into their customers' networks. And then if you look at who their customers are, you know, it's really a who's who of important federal agencies and critical technology infrastructure. So they were attacked, we think they were likely attacked not as the target itself, but as the distribution model. Next. And as part of that highly trusted access, as you can see here, this is a researcher, an antivirus researcher, who noticed that SolarWinds previously was telling their customers that they needed to trust the SolarWinds systems and actually disable antivirus for the Orion products. So when you have ultra deep access into your customers' environments, and you have credentials to be able to do whatever you need, and you're turning off some of the basic security mechanisms, in retrospect, it does look like that's a little bit of a recipe, you know, to potentially be turned into a vehicle to target and attack your customers. So timeline quickly of how things evolved. On December 8th, that's when FireEye first announced that they had been breached. Next. And then on December 13th, that is when FireEye and Microsoft shared more technical details about exactly what happened. But it turned out that actually this attack had started much, much earlier. Next. So as far back as over a year ago, we've now been able to determine that the attacker tested their ability to insert code into the Orion platform by adding a benign class. So that's the beginning of when we start to think that possibly some of the code might have been manipulated at SolarWinds. We still don't know exactly when everything started, how they got that access, but we do have some ideas. And then we can see that later in March, the first version of SolarWinds Orion product was pushed to their customers with a backdoor in it. That was in March of this year. And we think that, well, we know that potentially 18,000 SolarWinds clients were compromised. And as of December 16th, so just a couple days ago, last week, so there's now an update where you can actually, we think you can kill the malware. So for organizations, that haven't already, certainly updating Orion and getting that kill switch into their environment, that is critical.
Okay, so I'll continue from here. So now I'm gonna walk you guys through how the breach occurred, like from an organization perspective. So first of all, an organization would need to get the updated Orion platform. So it could be either automatically through the automatic update if the system is open to the internet, or even manually installed by someone that wanted to update the system. Then the moment that the update, after the update had happened, so actually a legitimate process that is part of the Orion platform called the SolarWinds business layer host .exe began executing. And what it did is essentially load the piece of the backdoor model, which was called the business layer .dll. And really the first thing that the malicious code did is it verified that it runs inside the business layer host process. Then the malware would just wait between 12 and 14 days. Even after the 12 and 14 days, there was like a random amount of time that it would take just to avoid like a security product scan and any detection by a cybersecurity solution. And it also took a lot of effort to make sure that it's running on a real target. So it verified that the domain is not a domain that belongs to SolarWinds. They had all kinds of strings that represented domains that should be avoided, and that they obfuscated. They checked if it's a test environment. They checked that there's no running processes that are related to security products. No drivers are loaded. Really took a lot of effort to make sure that they're not running together with any security solutions, and that they're running in a real network. Then after they waited this period of time and the environment looked okay, so they started reconnaissance and information gathering. So some of this data, such as like the physical address and network interfaces, the domain name of the device, they were communicated back to the attackers during the next phase. So after the reconnaissance, really they started the initial communication to the command and control server. This is the address of the command and controls. I should say the infamous address already. And the domain that the malware tried to reach actually contained in it parts of the data that were gathered in the reconnaissance to signal to the command and control server who is the targeted attack. And actually the kill switch that Andrew mentioned earlier, so it was a joint effort by Microsoft and FireEye to take over this domain, so that any new attempts to connect to it and continue spreading the malware would be stopped. So then, based on the transmitted data, the malware could be redirected to a different command and control server. And what they did here is that a lot of time they sort of re-register domains again to avoid detection, and they use hosting on major cloud providers also to look like it's a genuine system and a real system. And then from that moment on, the attackers actually had manual hands-on operations. So there was an operator operating the malware, trying to identify what he has on the system. There were all kinds of commands that he could set, from running things on the compromised machine, looking at files, deleting files, looking at registry values. So really powerful commands. And all this communication was also kind of hidden in plain sight. What the attackers did is they used the Orion improvement protocol, which is a protocol that is part of the Orion package. That is meant like to improve the experience in Orion itself. And by using it and just changing some fields in some of the messages, they were able to smuggle their communication without getting noticed. So then the goal, just like to sort of recap of what we talked about so far. So the attackers were really stealthy in their way of operation. So whenever they did an operation, they replace file or replace processes, they would change it back to the original artifacts just to avoid detection. They moved laterally through the system by using the different credentials that they obtained using their malicious software. The IP addresses were located in the victim's country, again to avoid detection. They used the Orion improvement protocol to hide their traffic in plain sight. The host names that they used matched the victim environment, and they used the teardrop, which is a memory-only dropper, and beacon, which is a Cobalt Strike tool, again to continue and perform their operation. Essentially, the way it looked is that you would get the MSP, which is the update. It would include the DLL, which was malicious. The DLL itself is a regular DLL of the program. It had a class called Inventory Manager that activated the malicious code, which is called the Orion Improvement Business Layer. Okay. So what were the attackers' goal? So once they got into the system, they try to identify the users and get credentials to access other systems. So they could do that both by viewing the traffic, because the device that they compromised, SolarWinds, had traffic monitoring capabilities, and also in a lot of times the instance itself contained credentials. And then each time when they obtain credentials, they compromised the system that the credential used for, try to find stronger credentials there, and essentially move laterally. They use different credentials each time, again, to avoid a common detection mechanism. So security solution wouldn't see the same credentials doing a lot of activity or above some certain threshold. And they also try to obtain either a global admin or a SAML token certificate, which sort of give them a really powerful access. So with SAML token signing, they could create their own claims and sign them themselves, so they could access services with the permissions that they needed. And with a global admin, obviously, they could also give themselves, create users and give themselves permissions to access the data that they wanted. So then, using the credentials that they managed to obtain, They impersonate either an organization user or a privileged account, and this is their goal, is to access on either on-premise or cloud resources of the organization. So the goal is espionage, and this is the way to do it. You have the credentials to access the data, and they used it to get whatever was interesting for them, obviously in each organization. This is the primary motive of the attack. And then finally, they had one more step, which is established persistence. So they wanted a way back or a way to get data even without the implant. And according to the researchers so far, there were two ways, or many two ways that they did it. One was by compromising a federation trust service. So for example, Azure AD. In this way, this is sort of a way to pair an organization and give access between organizations to one another. So actually by doing that, they could give themselves permissions to return back. Or they could abuse the OAuth application or service principal credentials, which are again mechanism that would allow access even without the malware on the target networks. And then they also had various ways to exfiltrate the data, like using Outlook Web Access and things like that. So the initial response that was published from SolarWinds was that based on the initial the investigations to date, there was no evidence that that there was any tampering with the source code. There was a compromise of the build system, but no source code repository was tampered with. So this is the official response from SolarWinds to the SEC in December 14th. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about like how from a technical perspective we see the compromise of SolarWinds, and that the evidence that we see in the field might suggest otherwise. So essentially, we know that the attacker infiltrated the build system in October 2019. What we noticed, and this is a research made by Reversing Labs, is that they added like a benign piece of code that does nothing, and it was sort of just a proof of concept for them. So we don't know like what was the entry point to SolarWinds. We saw some reports saying it's Office 365 or exposed FTP credentials or something via GitLab, but this will have to wait for the official report. But we do know that the general process of releasing the Orion product was that you'd had to write the code, you'd had to build it, you need to sign it, then you package it for an update, and you release it to clients. So already in a version from October 19, we saw this small piece of code that actually does nothing, but it's an indicator of the attackers sort of doing a proof of concept to see if they can compromise the build system, inject their code, get like a signed package that includes the code that they added, and then they could see in the client side if this if they actually got this version. So this is really something that is not noisy. It doesn't have a lot of effect. It really does nothing, but it's a way for them to test that this method would work. So then when we look at the March version, which is the version that we know that contained the complete backdoor, so we see that the attackers they invested a lot of effort in making their code look just like it came from the Orion developers. Okay, so they follow the naming conventions of the Orion developers so that the code would look the same. They even used the same utility functions that the Orion developers used. They used the same name, but changed the implementation a little bit. But still, if someone would have audited the code or tried to review it, they would see that, I don't know, every time you need to generate a user ID, you call the same function, even though for the attackers they use their own implementation, and for the regular product it used the regular implementation. They modified the inventory manager class, which was a perfect target in a stand of a class that could run a malicious backdoor. So the inventory manager usually runs like long-running background tasks, and running a backdoor is perfectly suitable to that case as well. So this is actually the case that they have used. Here we can see the flow. So this is the regular flow. This is an image prepared by Microsoft, and we see that during the refresh internal, once you ran the backdoor version, it would jump into this code, which is the malicious code. So again, they invested a lot of effort in making the code look exactly like it came from the SolarWinds developer. Here we can see this code in red. This is an image made by Reversing Labs. We can see this is the code on top is the code before the malicious injection, and the code after is the code with the call to the backdoor. So these like 8 lines of code are the ones that trigger the call to the backdoor and run it in a separate thread. So again, the code really tried to masquerade as it is SolarWinds Orion code and look as if it comes from them developers. The attackers knew how Orion developers wrote their code. They knew what's their standards. They knew how their network looked like. They knew what domain names not to use. So they really had a deep understanding of the development pipeline at SolarWinds. Then finally, when we look at the signature times of the DLLs in the package, we see that the evidence, first of all, the one that we see here, so we can see that all of them were signed roughly in the same time, and there are other evidence that are referenced in the Reversing Labs research, but essentially this sort of proves that the signing occurred within like a minute of the library compilation. So there is really no time for attackers to monitor the system, like replace some binaries, change something, and then have it signed. The only simple explanation to this is if the attacker managed to somehow inject their code into the source itself, and then have it built as part of the build system and signed in the normal workflow of the build pipeline itself. Andrew, to you.
Sorry about that. I was on mute there.
Yeah.
But so suffice it to say, the impact has been huge. I would think about the impact in 2 different ways. The first is how have SolarWinds customers been affected? And then the second is how has SolarWinds itself been affected? And so what we know already is that a tremendous number of extremely critical federal agencies have already been hacked. We don't necessarily know exactly what was exposed, but I think we can look at this list and we can all agree that the State Department, the Department of Treasury, the Nuclear Security Administration, that these are big and important federal agencies, and having their data compromised is important. In addition to that, we know that FireEye, Microsoft, and Cisco have been impacted. Obviously, Microsoft and Cisco are 2 of the most important pieces of almost every enterprise's environment, and of course, FireEye is a very important security company as well. So the impact to customers has been huge. What we'll learn over the next couple of weeks and months is how deep into organizations like Microsoft and Cisco did the SolarWinds attackers get, and are they able to turn around and turn Microsoft, Cisco, and others into attack vectors themselves? Fingers crossed that that's not the case, but these guys are pretty sophisticated, and so we're not going to know that for a couple more weeks or months. Next slide, please. So the impact to SolarWinds has been incredible. When this, before this was made public, their stock price closed on Friday, December the 11th at $23.55, and you can see that it plummeted 40% all the way down to last Friday. It closed at $14.18. So that represents nearly $3 billion in shareholder value that was erased from SolarWinds. And so I think one of the questions that we all have to ask is, if we ourselves are developing software and we've got update servers that we're delivering into our own customers, are we going to be targeted in this same way? And then lastly, we certainly don't know anything here, and we're not lobbing any accusations. We're just repeating some things that we've seen already come out in the media. But when you have these big events where we know that the stock price is going to appreciate quickly or depreciate quickly, that then sometimes causes some temptations for insiders. And again, we don't know anything, but there is some speculation online that there was some insider trading that might have happened ahead of this news announcement. So now an organization such as SolarWinds, not only do they have a technical nightmare and a PR nightmare related to this incident, now they have to run some pretty significant internal investigations and deal with the second PR nightmare around some of these speculations about insider trading. It's just not where you want to be as an organization. And so then as we look at the geographic impact, this is what we're showing you here is sort of a hotspot of potentially impacted companies. And you can see that there's kind of a heavy impact in sort of the modern economies of the world. Microsoft's president said, in effect, this is not just an attack on specific targets, but on the trust and reliability of the world's critical infrastructure in order to advance one nation's intelligence agency. And so, obviously he's referring to, we think that this was sponsored by Russian nation state attackers. And yes, I mean, one of the big lessons to learn about this is that, anything that we've trusted in the past can itself become, a vehicle in which we can be breached.
So now we want to talk about a little bit the lessons that we took from these incidents and maybe some thoughts that we have. So first of all, if we look at like how targeted attacks worked or usually worked, so they mainly worked by exploiting a vulnerability. It could be a 0-day or 1 day, and then you get a code execution on a device, and you would obviously try to run at high privileges and again use the same lateral movement or vulnerabilities to compromise other devices in the network, or to even vulnerabilities to move inside the network. So this is what the industry was focused at. This was the main threat. So we became really good at, or we invested a lot in identifying exploitation of vulnerabilities, and we invested a lot in identifying unknown code or unauthorized code being executed. And as an industry, we became quite good at that. But also in parallel, we came accustomed to trusting binaries that are signed using a valid certificate. We became accustomed to trusting that they are safe. Even if we referred to in an earlier point in the presentation, that a lot of time we didn't even run our security tools on them, so we trusted them heavily. This is sort of infers the trust in the developer's pipeline. So again, these systems enjoy the high level of trust, and they can do privileged actions. And obviously, this is something the attackers used for their gain. So the attackers understood that by compromising a software supply chain, you can get really high-profile targets, and you could also work under the radar by using the native APIs and protocols of the platforms that you that you compromised. So to us, this is like one of the reasons that this attack became so lucrative for the attackers. It's a way to sort of avoid the classic ways of attacking, and you don't need to invest in in exploiting a vulnerability, which first of all is really hard technically now, and also takes a lot of time, and also has a high chance of being detected. By doing it this way, you save yourself sort of the troubles of that. But then also because what we were used to see is exploitation of vulnerabilities and exploitation of code. So we focused our protections or our application protection on that aspect. So we saw over the past year, we saw a lot of effort going into shipping application that has no vulnerabilities. So it could be static analysis, it could be software composition analysis, dynamic analysis, all these names. Essentially, they try to make sure that the applications we ship are shipped without vulnerabilities, dependency vulnerabilities, check that we don't use packages with vulnerabilities, and it shows like just how afraid we were from someone finding a vulnerability in our application and exploiting it to attack us. But when you invest so much in one area, essentially the investment in securing the development infrastructure itself and the development pipeline remain behind. At the same time, source code grew a lot in importance. So each phase of the cloud computing era led to a consolidation of SDLC into code. So it started with computing being code, then infrastructure became code, and now orchestration and the CI/CD pipelines are defined using code. So these changes actually increased the importance of the code repositories, and in addition to that, changes such as cloud computing, microservices, and us getting accustomed to consume API increased our need for working with secrets, and as a result also of working with secrets in code. And also related to the SolarWinds incident, so we also saw that in November 2019, a researcher also identified one of their public repositories on GitHub leaking FTP credentials. We don't think it's related to the breach, but essentially it's something that could be used to breach a company. Obviously, FTP credentials is not something that you want to have online, and that for everyone to have access to that server. So source code was always valuable, both as intellectual property and a blueprint of an organization, but we think the recent trends made it much more critical and much more important, and a higher target from the standpoint of attackers. Whatever you assume is secure becomes insecure, so the development infrastructure became the new weakest link. There are multiple places in the software development lifecycle that code can be tampered with. We don't really know exactly what is the tools and what are the systems that were used in SolarWinds, and we still have a lot to learn. And I assume over the time things are revealed and we learn more, so we think of better ways of protecting ourselves and driving lessons from this incident. But we do feel that attackers grow in sophistication. They are aided or directed by nation-state actors, and I think this scenario shows really just how powerful the use case of breaching a company, creating a supply chain attack, and attacking its customer is worth. So we really should acknowledge this liability that comes with software development, and protect our development pipelines so that our clients can rest assured that we're not adding more liability and risks to them.
Okay, so the next, now that we've learned some of these lessons and we've, evaluated what happened, the next question becomes, what should we do? And again, I think there's two ways to think about what we should do. The first is, well, one, are you a SolarWinds customer? If you are, then obviously there's a important step to take in terms of updating, Orion in order to get that kill switch. But the second thing is, what other vendors do you have in which you're allowing access into your environment? And starting to think about, how we can start applying some of the things that we know about access controls to them. We think about least privilege as an important way to secure our networks. Maybe we should start applying that to software vendors as just an example. And then the second thing is, if you yourself are a software vendor, what changes do you need to make in your own SDLC to start thinking about and putting on par securing your own development infrastructure, just like we do the contents of our SDLCs and the outputs of our SDLCs? In other words, there's a lot of tools out there like SAST and DAST and WAF and RASP and IAST to secure, the applications that we're building, the contents of the DevOps pipeline and the output. But what about the pipeline itself? So those are the two ways in which we think you should start thinking about actions to take. And with that, I'll pass it back to Ronan. We'll jump in on some specific recommendations that we have.
Thank you, Andrew. So first, let's start with how can you protect yourself from such a use case? So from a supply chain attack by one of your vendors. So first of all, you need to understand what systems you have that either gets updated automatically or consume updates automatically. Then, if you can run AV or EDR on one of the systems, this is obviously preferable. These solutions will be able to identify any unusual activity coming out from them. So only if it's a must and only if it's something that that the vendor says explicitly that you can do. First of all, ask them to convince you why you should remove it, but try to avoid it as much as possible. Then create least privilege policies again for your software vendors. So make sure that they only have access to what they need. And again, if you can do it on a whitelist basis and only give them access to the services that they need, it would be best. And then finally, our suggestion is that you would monitor the activity and the events that are coming out of their systems using SIEM or XDR. And these should be capabilities every vendor supports. In this way, you'll be able to identify any anomalies in the access of the systems and the access that they are doing to your internal systems and services. You'll be able to identify any newly created accounts or permissions in the systems and services that you use, and any unusual grants such as any unknown authorization flow or a federation grade in the ADFS would be able to be identified. So these are from a customer consuming services perspective. Then if you're a company that is developing code and you want to make sure that such a thing won't happen to you and reduce the risk of your company having such an incident. So first of all, hardened access controls for the infrastructure that you use for the development. So this would be the source code repositories, the build system. Try to adopt a least privilege approach in all of them, and make sure that only people that need access have access. Make sure that the services are not publicly accessible. Any service that you have in your SDLC, make sure that if you can, it's not accessible to everyone. Audit everything. Audit all the systems. Audit credentials, additions. change the default credentials, and require a MFA for all the users in the systems. Again, these are things that we're used to seeing in other places, but a lot of times in the SDLC themselves, we see that because developers are sometimes treated with a steel glove, so sometimes the things are not enforced. Then we also recommend to search public repositories for the organization's code that might have leaked. Code leaks are a way to sort of get a blueprint to what you're building and to what you're doing. So especially in this era that everything is in code. So by having a code leak, an attacker can identify the technologies used, the services, the building infrastructure. So obviously, this is something that you would want to look for. Then another important suggestion is to search your repositories for hard-coded secrets. Again, here, if we look back at the SolarWinds incident, so credentials and access tokens and keys were used to move laterally through the system and to gain access to other systems. So obviously, if you have credentials in code and an attacker gets access to a developer's machine, they could use these credentials to access these systems or services. So it's not that only the developers in your company have access to it, which is also something that you don't want. But now if someone compromised even one developer, they could see the secrets in the code base and move from there. And then finally, adopt integrity checks to confirm that the output of each phase is as expected. So one thing is commit signing. This is a way for you to make sure that the code the developer commits, that your developers commit, originates from the developers themselves. If you work with assuming you work with executable and libraries, make sure they are signed as well, and check their certificates. And obviously, in your development methodologies and enforcement, make sure that you require code review and eliminate any evasion techniques. Again, we still don't know exactly how SolarWinds got the malicious code inside, but when we try to think about it, so anything from direct commits to the master branches or reviews that are made too quick, things like that could also be the way. And I guess as time goes and we'll get more insight into this incident, we'll be able to know for sure. And I'll jump to a demo real quick. Lost it? No. Okay. So in the demo, I'll try to focus on the features that we have that are related to this incident and talk about them a little bit. So I'll start with the access review. What we do in the access review is that we try to help our clients achieve a least privilege model on their source control. So we look at who has permissions to what, and what is the actual activity that is observed in the source control. Whenever we identify that access is redundant or that the user is stale, so we're able to alert on that to our organization. And we also allow remediating directly through the platform. So for example, if I identify access privileges, so I can select the access privileges I want. I can click resolve and either reduce their permission or remove their permissions from the specific source code repository completely. Or I can also create directly a ticket to the native workflow, so that either the relevant manager or director could look at it and decide whether this should be revoked or not. So again, the goal here is that organization could reach a least privilege approach in the source control as well, so that even if a developer is compromised, he only has access to the specific repositories, and this developer won't be able to commit to any code or to important code or things like that. Then the other part that we do is we have the insecure configurations. in this section, what we do is we look at all the configuration that exist either at the organization level or at each repository level, and we try to identify any improvements that can be done there. So, for example, one basic feature that should be enforced in all the production repositories is branch protection. So we can identify which repositories lack disability, and again, we're able to set this to turn it on through the platform, or again directly create an issue to the native workflows that you use. But even if this configuration is set, branch protection is sort of the basic feature that you would use to make sure that any code that enters your production branches is reviewed, and you would have all kinds of rules around that. But still, administrators and other privileged users might be able to still commit directly to protected branches. So this is also something that we monitor. So for example, if we see a developer committing directly to a protection branch, we'll alert you on that, and you can verify what was the reason and whether it is something that is approved. And the last example I'll show in this case is, for example, when a pull request is merged without review. So in this case, a pull request is open, someone merged it without anyone making sure that the review was confirmed. Obviously, this is not great, and you would want to review it. We have other policies in this section, but sort of because of the time, I would skip them. Essentially, we make sure code signing is enforced if this is a use case for an organization. We look if a pull request is merged too fast. We look if we see any new approvers, things around that. Then the next section that we have is around secrets. I won't go into all the models that we have here, but essentially what we do here is that we try to identify user secrets such as username and password, tokens, API keys that developers might commit to code. Whenever we identify that, so we'll alert on it here. But we also integrate with the developers' workflows, so they would be able to remediate it on their own, and that it wouldn't even reach the security team. So whenever a developer opens a pull request or modifies it, we scan the content. Whenever we identify secret, we comment directly in the pull request itself, so the developers can remove it. And then once the code is merged back into the master branches or the production branches, the secrets won't be there, effectively reducing the risk involved. Also, as we mentioned, this is something that could endanger the services that the secrets are responsible for if a developer with access to the secret is compromised. Also something that we learned in the incident. And then the final model that I want to show is the code leaks, where the goal here is we try to find any proprietary private code that has leaked to the public domain. So again, we have several policies here. I won't go into each of them, but essentially, whenever we identify code that matches any code that is found in the public domain that looks like it's a private code of the organization and proprietary code, we'll alert on it. So if a DMCA needs to be submitted, you will be able to do it, and essentially you'll be able to reduce the risk of someone using it to identify your core technologies, the services that you use, and the pipeline, and use it to target the organizations. We're kind of running out of time, so I won't have time to show you the rest of the models, but we have other sections here that are again focused on the various types of files that exist in the source code repositories and the various changes that happen to source control repositories, and we try to protect the entire pipeline mainly through that. So it could be anything from identifying too far to travel in developers' activity, looking at critical codes. Again, as we mentioned in the beginning, since this trend of everything is code, we see more types of code in the repositories. so you can differentiate between the actions and understand who's doing what. But again, if this is something that's interesting to your organization, so you can always reach out, and we'll be happy to show you more and explore the relevant use case for you guys. So we've reached the Q&A, Andrew.
Yeah, we've got a number of great questions that have already come in. We'll answer as many of them as we can. Before we get started, I did want to mention that we are willing to make our software available to anybody that wants to assess their own development infrastructure. Mitch, I think will shoot you a link where you can sign up. But we think time of crisis basically is not really the time to sell. It's the time to help. It's the time to come together. So if anyone wants to do an audit of their own infrastructure, we're happy to make our software available to help your organization do that. That being said, let me jump into some of the questions that we got, and we will basically start at the top. So the first question is it possible only for a nation state to carry out an attack this broad and sophisticated? How easily could this attack be replicated by other actors? And given its apparent success, do you think it might be?
So I guess my answer would depend on how hard it was to compromise SolarWinds in the first phase. I would expect it to be rather difficult. So I don't think it's something that it's easy to implement. Also, if we look at the amount of infrastructure and planning and operations that you would have to use, so definitely it's not something a small shop could do. That said, I do feel that there are, and we did see things like that in the past, that you could if you find a company that you could use a supply chain to target, so you could do, I would say, maybe easier things. So one example that jumps to my mind is, for example, creating a ransomware and then using the update mechanism simply to install the ransomware and ask for ransom. So I don't need any infrastructures like to collect the data and do the espionage and command and control and really powerful agents and implants. I could write my ransomware and try to make money out of it. So I guess my final answer to this question is it depends how hard it is to compromise the supply chain of a company that you want to target for a supply chain attack. For this use case, I assume it was rather hard, but I guess there might be also easier cases out there that could happen.
Okay, the next question is, it appears the attacker knows the Orion development procedures well. So could it be an ex-employee from the SolarWinds dev team? Ronan, I'll let you answer that mostly, but I just want to say we don't have any insider knowledge. So we don't know if it was an insider or exactly who did it. We're just reading along and trying to distill the information and make it easier for everyone else to consume, and of course, leveraging our own expertise. But Ronan, do you have anything else to say on that?
Yeah, so I agree with you completely, and I think the only other thing to note is that they had a lot of time to plan this and to carry it out. So the initial POC was at October, which was really small a footprint and really almost did nothing, and then only 4 months after, or even 5 or 6 months after, they had the final build ready. So it took them time to do it. So we didn't see any indicator of an internal employee, but again, like Andrew said, we don't have this data, so we can't know for sure.
Next question is, most of the major vendors in cybersecurity have been hacked in some shape or form in the past few years. How is this different? And I guess I would actually just add, Ronan, before you jump in, I wouldn't say that most major cybersecurity companies have been hacked. I would say that there are some very famous incidents. But go ahead, Ronan.
So, to me, what's different here is, first of all, this is a tactic that we are not used to seeing. We mentioned this a little bit in the webinar, but so far when we used to see a company being breached, it was through like a vulnerability in some product that was exploited, and then through that I don't know, exfiltrated data or something like that. This is an entirely different tactics, entirely different way of operation. And obviously the scope and impact of this attack is exponentially larger. It's only enough to look at the organizations hit by that, and obviously each of these organizations would have really good security controls, and any attack that is would follow the same patterns that we used to see so far would have been probably identified by at least some of the companies there. But the fact that they use this different tactic, and the fact that they, I'd say, found a target that has such a strong dominance in the market, made it think much more powerful and different.
Okay, so the next question is, so was the malicious code inserted into the source control management system, or was the build system compromised so that it inserted the malicious code?
So, like, to me, again, we can't know 100% for sure, but we can try to think what is the more likely scenario. And the technical understanding that we have right now, and the way we see things, is that it's more likely that there was a change in the code itself. Again, we would have to wait for the final reports and the final statements by SolarWinds, and hopefully they will share all this information with the industry, so that we would all be able to understand exactly what happened and arm ourselves with better solutions that would be able to protect it. But again, we can't really know for sure. My understanding and my insight is that it's a source code tampering, but again, I don't have like the official answer.
So that is probably about all the time we have for questions. Mitch, did you want to do the raffle?
Yeah, happy to. Wonderful talk, guys, and great job of doing some sleuthing, even though we don't know certainly all the details. Maybe we won't for some time. Let's just award a couple of gift cards. 4 of them, matter of fact. We're going to give those out to Christopher K, Kelly G, Tara A, and Zach S. The folks here at securityboulevard.com will be in contact with you about how to get those gift certificates. Well, on behalf of our 2 great speakers, Andrew and Ronan from SiteCode today, we really appreciate everybody joining us. It's both fascinating topic, and I'm sure we'll be learning a lot more over the coming weeks and months. We'd like to thank you for joining us. We know it's a busy time, and we wish everyone the best with the upcoming holidays. So be safe, be well, and be careful out there. Take care, everybody.